What's up, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Thought-Provoking Conversations. I am one of your hosts here, Irvin Ramirez. Joining us is our second host, Yair Puente. Joining us after a swole session, getting a little boxing in, getting those 1-2s in, those jabs in. Today we are joined by yet another one of our fraternity brothers. We're continuing this interview series highlighting different men of color, specifically Latino men of color, and kind of what they do and what their story is all about. Today we're joined by Salvador Hernandez. He's an enigma. He's been referenced to us multiple times. A lot of other people have been like, hey, you should have Chato on. I bet you guys have a really good conversation on. So, hey, we went out and made it happen. So, Salvador, thank you for joining us today.
Cool, man. Thank you for the invite. It's good to be here.
Sweet. So before we get going, you got anything for the people before we dive into the questions?
No, I don't have anything right now, but I do have a couple questions lined up.
All right, cool. So we'll start with the basic of just, kind of tell us a little bit about yourself, kind of what your story's been so far, what you're doing right now, things like that.
Yeah, cool. That's cool. It's interesting, right? As COVID-19 has happened, there's been opportunities to have conversations. And so this is going to be like the third time that I've been able to kind of join a conversation like this online. And so I really enjoy it. We wouldn't have had the chance to meet each other had it not been for something like this. So that's a pretty cool thing. And just want to give you a shout out for that. But yeah, as you said, my name is Salvador Hernandez. For me, born and raised in Omaha, Nebraska. I'll be turning 36 years old next week. So, but I don't feel 36. I feel like I'm in my 20s still.
Hey, let's go.
Yeah, so it's been a journey. I'm sure as many people have talked about their experiences. So today, I just want to be able to share just my perspective, and my perspective is based on just the life experiences that I've had. I grew up in kind of a unique situation. My dad is from Mexico, from Guanajuato, Mexico. He came to the United States probably around the age of 18, 19 years old. They come from a little rancho called La Descubridora in Mexico.
Mm-hmm.
And throughout my travels, been fortunate enough to, visit a lot of different places. And when I would go places, people would ask where I was from.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would always, Nebraska, and people would trip out on me and say like, man, there's Mexicans in Nebraska. And I used to kind of hate it, man. Like I would get like, I kind of would hate it though. There's certain things that would trigger. And when people would kind of like, cause it was like, they were making fun of it kind of, kind of clowning a little bit. And there's a lot of things that, as I've grown and as I've learned, I'm able to reflect back on my life and understand why things were triggering. But at that time, I didn't really understand. And we'll kind of dig into that a little bit later within the conversation. But the way my family ended up, at least on my dad's side in Omaha, Nebraska, was because of the meatpacking plants. People from his rancho, and not just his rancho, but the surrounding ranchos, somebody came to Omaha, Nebraska to work in the meatpacking plant, and the word kind of spread that there was a place to work, there was housing, and it's kind of what brought the migration, So in Omaha, there's a big population of people from Guanajuato, from there's 3 ranchos, La Descubridora, There's one that it's called Dolores, and there's one called El Refugio. And all three of those ranchos, there's a lot of people here. And so that's how my family came to be here on my dad's side. My mom's side is a little bit different as well. Um, Her mom came from Michoacan, Mexico, and the family came in the 1930s. So it was my great grandpa. They were one of the first families in Omaha, Nebraska, the Velez family. And when they came to Omaha, they came as migrant farmers. My grandma was one of, I think they had 14 or 17 kids, but she was, I think, the last one that was born in Mexico. So she was one of the older ones. I think she was the oldest woman, and there was maybe three older men. Uh, but that's kind of how they came to Omaha, Nebraska. The Union Pacific Railroad brought them to work, my great grandpa. And when they came to Omaha, they lived in an area close to downtown on the outskirts called Little Italy. Now, what they've told me is that when they came there was a lot of immigrants, but not Spanish-speaking immigrants. So you had families that were speaking Italian. They call it Little Bohemia over there, kind of as well. So the grandmas, they didn't speak Spanish; they spoke these other languages. Um, so there was like Polish immigrants, and what kind of I've been told, and I don't know how true this might be, but um, the neighborhood voted. They made a little vote to decide if they were going to allow this Mexican family to live in the neighborhood. Um, so, little different migration, right? They left Pátzcuaro, Michoacan, and ended up coming up to the United States. Um, Now, one of the things that was happening at that time, right, there was policies that were in place that were bringing workers to come and work. Worker permits. I think even they talked about, what do they call it, the Bracero program. So that's kind of a history, right? A little bit on my mom's side. But her dad actually is from Cuba. So my mom's half Mexican and half Cuban. And so he came as a political refugee when Fidel Castro came into power in Cuba. Um, and so when he came to the United States, I think they gave him an option, and Nebraska was one of the options. And so that's how he ended up here. So, I kind of talk about my history, right? Because that's a really important thing when you ask, well, who are you? Well, you have to start to begin to understand where you come from and why things happen to really begin to understand like who you are, because it goes deep. So that's just a little piece of who I am. But I grew up here in Omaha, Nebraska, as a Mexican kid. Um, I have a lot of tios and primos and primas here. Grew up in South Omaha, went to Spring Lake Elementary School, Mars Middle School, and graduated from South High School. My whole life, grew up around Mexican families. My mom, like I said, it was unique because my mom spoke English. She grew up here in Omaha, but I grew up with Mexican traditions and values. Always family together every weekend. We're carne asada. There's always that tightness, that togetherness. Something was happening, birthdays, baptisms, quinceañeras. Uh, my grandparents, they lived here. My dad's mom and dad, my mama Pia Porfiria Hernandez, que en paz descanse, she was the pillar of our family. And then my grandfather, who I'm named after, Salvador Hernandez, is also, so the family was pretty tight. Eventually what happened is my abuelita passed away probably when I was in about 6th grade. And the family dynamics began to change in certain aspects, in certain ways. My grandpa left to Mexico. But we still have that tightness, that bond that keeps us together. And so, you know, growing up in Omaha during that time, things were a little different. Spring Lake Elementary School, if you look at it now, it's very, very like 90% Spanish speaking. Back then, when I was there, there wasn't a lot of Spanish speaking people, kids, yet at that time. Um, I even backtrack a little bit. Someone once asked me not too long ago, how did I know I was different from like other kids? And for me, even when I was in kindergarten, I remember being placed in ELL class, even though I spoke English. You know, I remember I would have to leave the kindergarten class and I would go to this special class with other kids that were Mexican like me. And we would work together, I guess, with the teacher. But I remember when I was in the mainstream class, this kid, and his name was Carlos, I'll never forget. Um, every time it was time for like reading time and all the kids would sit on the carpet, Carlos and I would stay at our desk and we would cry for our moms. Um, and again, there's a lot of things that later on in life, as I begin to learn these experiences, I begin to understand why. Now, as a kid in kindergarten, I could feel it, you know, you can feel the disconnect, right? There's something wrong that's making me feel why when you cry, it's because there's an emotion. And so as a little kindergarten kid, I would feel this emotion of disconnect, of sadness, of fear. Um, my mom would read to me, right? So when I would be sitting there, it would remind me of my mom, and I was far away from my mom. Um, so every time, you know, I would cry and cry. And then my mom found out, and I remember she had a talk with me. And after that talk was when I was able to feel safe and okay inside where I went and I sat on the carpet. Um, but you know, those were things that you would feel as a young kid, elementary school. My name's Sal instead of Salvador. Um, and a lot of people have these stories where their parents maybe would make them like Mexican food for lunch, and then kids would make fun of them. Um, I took a bean burrito one day because I wanted to be like my dad. Uh, so I told my mom to make me a bean burrito, and she did that and put it in a brown paper sack, just like my dad. And I remember, you know, first grade lunchtime, and then all these little kids that didn't look like me, didn't talk like me, you know, made me feel bad about it. So I remember these things. I remember as a little kid and them asking, well, what do you want to be when you grow up? And raising my hand and saying, oh, I want to work in a meatpacking plant like my dad. And like the look the teacher kind of gives, like, well, what the hell's wrong with this kid? Like, why would you want to do that? No. And then not understanding, feeling confused, like, why is that bad? You know, my dad's my hero. Why is that a bad thing? But not really understanding. Um, and that's kind of how things kind of go. See, we have this desire to feel connected, accepted, and loved. It's just a natural human thing that we want, that we have. And so as little kids, sometimes we do things so that we can feel accepted, so that we can feel loved and cared for and connected. Um, and so once I got to about sixth grade, um, there were kids that started to look like me, that talked like me, that had last names like me. Um, you know, and it was adolescence starts to happen, right? You go through puberty and things start to change, and there's different not only is it a physical growth, but now we're seeing a really big emotional growth, identity, right? You start to figure out, who am I? And as an elementary, I was in sixth grade, but I started puberty early. I was tall, I already had a bigote and everything. But this desire to feel connected. And the thing is that we kind of see what messages are being delivered, what perceptions, what society kind of saying. And there was this big perception of, you know, kind of being like a cholo. And so at that time, that was kind of like, okay, well, that's the cool thing to do. Well, maybe I should try to go that route. So there was, again, this desire of connectedness, acceptance. So I'm going to follow that because that's what I want. Um, And what that leads to is that sometimes we make some choices that are not very helpful towards our life. And I remember on this particular day, there was a young man who was in my grade, in my classroom, and he had been held back. And again, in reflection now, knowing everything that I know about life, he came from a really difficult home with no father, and with a mother that abused with substance abuse and neglect. And so one day after school, in his possession, he had a joint. And at that time, I had never smoked. It was something, I was todo menso at that time, but I wanted to feel cool. So I went along with it and I smoked with him. And the next day, the principal had come and pulled me out of the cafeteria. And I could see him walking with her, and he's kind of like shaking his head, like, and as she came up to me, she said, "Hey, did you smoke?" Like, and she was a mean principal too, man. Like, so I was pretty scared. And I kind of ratted on myself because I've never really been in that type of situation. And I kind of was like ashamed, maybe, I guess. And I said, "Yeah, I did." Um, and then they found out that it was marijuana. And this is a memory that I'll forever kind of carry because they ended up calling the police. They ended up calling my mom. And so my mom doesn't drive. And so my mom had to walk all the way up to the school. And sometimes it can be difficult for my mom to walk that kind of a distance. Uh, and so there was that kind of shame that was placed, right? And I was scared because I said, my mom's going to whoop my ass, she's going to come in here, and she was the disciplinary. And so I was nervous about that. And luckily I was like, well, the police are here, so she's not going to do it in front of them in the office. But I'll never forget this. As she came in through the door, it wasn't the reaction that I was expecting. When she came in, she was crying, but like crying to the point, when you can't breathe, kind of, and it's that kind of a cry. And so in between breaths, she's asking, and she says, "Why, mijo? ¿Por qué? Why?" And so, I remember that at that time I was very mad. I was very angry. I was upset. And I didn't have an answer for that question. Uh, in fact, that question would come up various times throughout my life. Why, mijo? Why? Why? And it took many, many, many years and life experiences to kind of fully understand, why those things were happening. And so, but I carry that with me. And I think it helps me a lot in the work that I do. And I'll kind of tell you a little bit about that, but this is kind of like a trajectory, right? So I'll continue with the story and not digress. But yeah, that was kind of the experiences that I would feel. My dad played baseball in a Mexican baseball league. And at that time it was kind of like Sandlot. They didn't have umpires or they like, it was just like some señor who would stand behind the pitcher and he'd have his beer in his hand, and that was him being the umpire. And it was like makeshift. They would cut carpet and put them down as bases. And the way it kind of worked was that you had this team from Guanajuato, and they would play the guys from Jalisco, and they would play Zacatecas, and that was just kind of how it was. But I have a strong memory of sometimes what they would do is they would drink right after the games. They'd have their chests full of cervezas, and they would drink at the park. And well, sometimes I think neighbors or neighborhoods, they didn't like that because sometimes maybe they would leave it messy, or for the most part, I don't think they really disturbed people. But maybe they would call the police, and so police would show up, and everybody would kind of try to hide or kind of run away from the beers. Well, there was a memory in particular that I have where my dad is walking, and I'm a young kid, maybe about 10, and the police kind of show up to this park. And as my dad's walking to the van, he gets pulled over by this cop. And tells, basically puts my dad in handcuffs and kind of makes him accountable for this chest of beer that didn't belong to him. And so, but I just remember this feeling as a little kid, and then, feeling really defenseless for this kind of like injustice, right? Like all these people are watching my dad be put in handcuffs. My dad's a good man, but he's being, humiliated in front of all this community. And I remember kind of trying to argue with the cop a little bit as a 10-year-old, saying, hey, I don't even know what I yelled at him, or I was trying to defend my dad. And he told me to shut up or else he would send me to juvenile hall. But these are memories that kind of stick, and they affect you as you continue down your path. And so, but I have these memories, some good memories, some bad memories of growing up in Omaha, Nebraska. One of the things that happened was that when I was in high school, I had some positive supports. So there was a counselor, Mr. Juarez, and he had my back a few times. I made some, unhelpful choices, and that could have resulted in me getting into trouble at school. And he kind of gave me a break a couple times. And that kind of made the difference, right? Instead of judging me, shaming me, kind of like making me feel this big, he had compassion, empathy. And so those are kind of things that I remember. I joined a thing called Latino Leaders at the high school, and was because of Mr. Juarez. And so initially it was because there was a lot of girls that were in this club. And but what ended up happening was that they ended up, doing community service, and it was kind of a cool group, right, to be a part of, something different. And I ended up getting voted to be president my junior year of high school, and that kind of was another turning point, where people were seeing something positive, right? Like, hey, you have the potential to do something good, something positive. And it wasn't just a counselor telling me, it was my peers telling me. But it's hard though, because you're, again, finding your identity. How do I fit in? How does this work? And so most of my friends growing up are going one way, and then I have some peers that are doing positive, but you're on a tightrope, and sometimes you lean to the left and lean to the right, and it can be difficult, right? Because we see what's happening at home, in the community, at school. There was a lot of things happening. I remember kids that would get in trouble on purpose, skip school on purpose, do drugs, violence. So there was a lot of that was happening, and there wasn't a lot of brown kids that were like in the honors classes or doing positive things. And so it was difficult. It was a difficult little navigation, but I had people that looked out for me, and I think that's what kind of made the difference, to help me, guide my way. There was a real key moment where I was making some real bad choices, and my parents got into a big argument. My dad was ready to kick me out of the house. I just seen my mom cry again. That question of "Por qué, mijo?" Why? My dad is not a big person to process emotions and feelings. His dad wasn't that way, and his dad wasn't that way. So it was tough, but it was a moment that stuck in my head, and it, slowly change started to happen slowly. And I was smart. I wasn't that I was dumb, but I wasn't the smartest, but I was a hard worker. And so with support, I was able to raise my GPA up, and this idea of college popped into my head. And I met a lady named Dr. Cynthia Gooch from UNL. I think she's at Metropolitan Community College now, but I'd always go to all her informationals and ask her all these questions, and she got to know me really well, and helped me out to get a scholarship to the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. And I owe a lot to her. in fact, to the point where I was able to, I ended up getting 5 scholarships in total. And of that year from South, only 2 of us went to UNL, the class president, who was a white kid, and then me with a 3.0 GPA. So it wasn't like I had honors or AP or, but I had a lot of heart and I think desire. And so that's kind of what led me to that path. And so, but yeah, you kind of asked me, well, who am I, and that's a real difficult question to answer, but I'll leave you to that point, right? That's kind of who I am, right? The son of Julia Hernandez and Victoriano Hernandez, right? Got Velez blood in me, Ondar blood from Cuba. But the roots go deeper beyond that, right? So Guanajuato and Pascuaro, and that's where I come from. So yeah, that's kind of my roots and upbringing of where I grew up. And I just talked and talked and talked. So I'm gonna give you guys a chance to chime in a little bit too. So, but yeah.
That was, we always really, I feel like I could speak for both of us here, but feel free to stop me at any time, Irvin. Whenever we ask this question, just like, who are you, right? We always get such different answers, right? And I think you've been the first person to really kind of highlight these moments, right? These moments of during that time, maybe you didn't come to a good conclusion, but now upon reflection, you noticed how they altered your life, right? These moments of like significant, whether it be hardship or just a significant challenge, right? And the things that happened in that moment, how they affected the rest of your life and kind of like how you develop mentally and how you kind of view the world, right? And I think that's really awesome, because I think that's how you really get to know and understand a person, because there's so many points that I truly related to you in a lot of ways, right? Like, for example, my father was also somebody who didn't really share his emotions a lot, right? So I grew up, and then my mom was also the same way because of a lot of like past hurts, right? Their parents were a little bit harder. They're both from Mexico, right? My dad's from Michoacan, and my mom is from Zacatecas, right? And they both had like difficult parents, my my grandfather was a bit of a drinker, and so he wasn't really taking care of his family. And my dad left at like the age of 16 to go work right here in the United States. And my mom, she had like her first relationship was really rough, and she just had like a lot of kind of abuse in her life, and she never really got a chance to be able to feel safe in showing her emotions. And that kind of passed down to her kids, right? And so I, as a kid growing up, I didn't have a lot of, ways that I felt safe being able to share how I felt, right? Had all these emotions inside, but one of the things that they taught me very early was like, as a man, you got to keep that emotion inside of you, right? You can't show people how much they hurt you. Can't show people how much they mean to you, because then they can hurt you, because then they got leverage on you, right? So it was always about this defensive position. And so yeah, I'm not going to go too far into it, but I just wanted to really thank you for sharing your perspective and sharing kind of like, what were some of these defining moments in your life? Because, I definitely related to you.
No, I definitely agree with that. Your way of storytelling is fantastic. I was very captivated that entire time. Just, I feel like I could really follow the story, and just, it's that immigrant story. It's that Hispanic experience that it seems a lot of us kind of faced in some level here, growing up in Nebraska in general. But, like Yair said, it's just a lot of those points that I really kind of related to, and just even started feeling some emotions come up in me myself, thinking of ways that my life had some similarities, some parallels that I was like, wow, like, yeah, that makes sense. Or, I kind of, it just sparked some thoughts that it was like, I hadn't thought about that in a while, type of thing. So, you know, we do appreciate you for sharing as much as you did there. But yeah, we can continue to dive into more questions. Yeah, I don't know. You said you had a couple that you wanted to ask. So go ahead.
Yeah, I think a kind of you set it up for a good discussion in terms of what does success mean to you, right? So kind of what's your definition of success and how has that changed over time, right? What did you think success was when you were a kid, right? Because you said, hey, I want to be just like my dad, right? I want to go work at the power plant, at the meatpacking plant, right? And how has that kind of evolved over time, and who were the because you kind of touched on this a little bit, but I just kind of want to hear like what's your success been and how has it evolved over time until to what it is now?
Yeah, and like I said, it's interesting. So by profession, I'm a social worker, clinical social worker. My profession is a mental health therapist. And so I don't feel like I'm a therapist. There's this song that I'll never forget as a kid. I don't know, it always stuck with me, like these Chicano rappers. And there was this group and this rapper, he would sing, and there was a line where he would say, um, what did he say? He said like, he was referencing rappers trying to be gangsters. And then he would say, but I'm not a rapper. I'm just a gangster trying to be a rapper. And so like I think about that and I'm like, man, I'm not a therapist. I'm not trying to be a therapist. I'm a community worker. I'm trying to help people. That's all I'm trying to do. And so when we think about this idea of success, right? Growing up, again, we're influenced by our surroundings and what's being taught to us. What's being shown. What messages are we receiving? Um, so as a kid, right, we have this idea that was like, man, I want to be like my dad. He's my hero. He works in the meat packing plant, and man, they came from Mexico. They bought this house, and that's kind of this idea of success, right? Well, they came to the U.S. to work, and you go and you try to make a better life because where we come from, life's a little bit hard. Um, and so, this is kind of this idea that's kind of placed inside, but then when we have these reactions, like meatpacking plant, why would you want to do that? These messages that are being delivered, that's not good, that's bad, right? Um, so these ideas and these kids that I grew up with becoming cholos, right? Getting involved with gangs and violence and, um, for them, this idea of success was that, I'm going to be the baddest kid that I can be. You're going to give me this label and this idea and say that I'm a gangster. Well, guess what? I'm going to be the baddest gangster that I can be. You say that I'm violent. Well, I'm going to be the most violent that I can be. I'm going to be a womanizer because I'm going to be the best womanizer that I can be. Right. So there's these different, again, what messages are being delivered, for success. Through my process, though, there was a lady named Margarita Lopez, and she worked at that time it was called Chicano Awareness Center, and now it's the Latino Center of the Midlands. She would go to the high school and she would work with kids too, and I was one of the kids that she would kind of help mentor. And I'll never forget that when I graduated from South High School at the age of 17, and we were walking out of South High together, and I remember her telling me, Salvador, you made it, right? You made it, but never forget where you come from. And so um, for me at that time, it was like, well, shit, I made it, I'm successful. Of all the kids, I'm the one that got to go to college, I made it, um, and what was being fed, and she had a point that I'll come back to. She said, never forget where you come from. And so, um, when I went to college, there's this different idea of success, right? It's very competitive, individualistic. You want to get the best job, the best internships. You want to be at the top, make the most money. Um, it's a really important thing. And so, uh, became competitive in college, right? My idea was that I wanted to help people, that I wanted to help the community. And so uh, one goal of mine that popped into my head, I got involved with these internship programs. There was one place called Inroads, and, I worked for a bank, and I, was trying to maybe do corporate. I did a degree in international business with minors in economics because I thought I wanted to travel the world, make lots of money, um, and that was going to be success. Uh, I ended up studying abroad in Mexico at the Tecnológico, at the Tech of Monterrey, because they said it was the Harvard of Mexico. And when I went there, most kids would go and do, a vacation. They would take English, Spanish classes. So it was like real easy, just a semester, just vacationing, partying. But when I signed up for classes, I was like, you know what? There's a chance for me to get an international business certificate from the tech, but I had to do 5 classes and I'd have to do it like with all in Spanish, and it was going to be hard. But and my mindset was like, where I come from, I've had to work hard for everything that nothing's ever been given. And so, again, that was my success, was trying to do all these things. And in my mind, I said, well, how can I help people? If I go work in Washington, D.C., right? This idea got put in my mind, that the most powerful country in the world. Um, but how am I going to get out there, man? It's not easy. It's a hard thing to do because I don't have money to pay rent, to connections, to get a job. Um, so I began to apply for internship programs out there, and I got denied, but it kind of just fueled it. And so I got in with, I did an internship at that time with Congressman Lee Terry, who's a Republican. But at that time, I didn't even know what a Republican was. I didn't know what a Democrat was. I was in college, man. I'm a kid from South Omaha. So, I don't know shit ni miedras. All I know is that he's a congressman, and that's, shit, that's going to look good on my resume. So my internship was a Republican congressman from Nebraska, and I was unpaid during the summer. I think I was like maybe a sophomore in college. Um, the following year, I did an internship with a United States Senator Ben Nelson, and that one I got paid like $6 an hour. It was part time, um, but it was a step closer. And then the following year, I finally got accepted into the Congressional Hispanic Caucus Institute as an intern, and spent the summer in D.C. working for Congresswoman Loretta Sanchez out of California. Um, but it was always, I was always on the grind because I was from Nebraska, because there wasn't a lot of opportunities, because people like me had to fight to make their way. Um, so I was always hustling. Like when I was in DC, it was about receptions. And at that time I was 21, so I could go to the bars and do things that people underage couldn't. While they were out sightseeing, I was out networking and meeting people and building my connections. Um, and it helped because that was my first job out of college. I worked for CHCI. I didn't even have to interview. They kind of offered it to me. They were like, "Hey, this position opened up. Do you want it?" And it was like, "Yeah." I told my mom I'm going to DC just for the summer, but then it was like, "Sabes qué? I'm not coming back," and that was really hard. Um, but it was kind of the start of the journey. But what I came to realize um, is that I made it, right? Like, this idea, I'm making it, what the fuck does making it mean? Um, so I'm in DC, I'm surrounded, I was on I think one time I was on this underground subway between the Capitol and the chambers, whatever. And Hillary Clinton is standing right next to me, right? She's a senator at that time. And on this subway, right? Like this little fucking there. And it's like, I guess I made it, this is this is it. But one of the moments that it kind of really kind of hits is I remember going to Mexico, because every year we would go to Mexico. My dad would drive, mom and dad, my tios primo, we would caravan every winter, 32 hours to get to Mexico, Guanajuato, and fucking just one of the best experiences in my life, because you know, we felt free down there on the rancho, just being out there, the smell of the wood burning, um, hearing the chickens and the dirt and just playing. And just, it was kind of like a home. And um, the reality is that we would go for like 2, 3 weeks, but it, you know, you just, it was just, it took your heart, man. Your heart was there. And I always dreaded the day that we would have to leave. So we would wake up like at 3 in the morning, the van would be packed up, and we're saying goodbye to everyone. And, you know, um, I would go in the van, and I was a little kid, and I'd start crying. You know, I wouldn't want people to see me crying, but we would drive out of the rancho and it was quiet. You could hear the crickets, and, you know, it was a dirt road, and we're driving out, and the music would be playing, and you would be sad because, you know, a part of your heart, your spirit was just there. Um, and so one year when this happened to be in DC, and I'm going to Mexico because, you know, now I'm in DC, so I don't caravan. I think I flew to Nebraska and I caravan. That's what it was. Um, but I'm thinking, wow, when I go, they're going to be like, oh man, you know, Chato que trabaja en con Bush, right? Because President Bush was president at that time. And I thought like people were just going to be like in awe, like, oh, you know, Washington, D.C., que la Casablanca and this and that. But, you know, what happened was like when I got there, nobody cared. Nobody even mentioned it. Nobody even said anything. Nobody cared, dude. I was just Chato. That's it. Salvador. Like, they didn't call me Salvador. They called me Chato. That's since I was a little kid. Um, and it was that reminder, right? Um, that wasn't important. My great aunt didn't care about that, you know. My tia and tios, they don't care about that. You're Chato, man. You're that kid from South Omaha. The kid that when we would come and, you know, carne asadas and, you know, we would go to the movies together. My mom would take all my cousins to the dollar movie and we would go and, you know, she would call everybody mijo and mija. And I was her only son, but that's kind of how it was, right? Like everybody is her kid. When the kids were all together, you know, I loved you as if you were my own, and I would take care of you. Um, so, you know, it was that reminder. It was just like, you know, this doesn't, you know, mean it's nothing, right? It's just it was kind of BS. Um, when I got back to DC, there was a lot of things that I noticed. You know, sometimes me and RJ talk about this. He'll talk about wearing suits, and you know, and I'm like, man, I tell RJ, I don't care about suits, man. That doesn't matter to me. And the thing is, because I was there at that point, you know, I made it to DC. Uh, Very few, even from the state of Nebraska, had gone to that point. And so there was an instance where I was at a happy hour, and there was a congressman um, with a lady, and this was a congressman that was Raza, and you know, we looked on his website and we're like, that does not look like La Señora that's on the website with him. That's his wife. This lady was a lot younger, and but everybody kind of respected this guy, and it kind of tripped me out. I was just like, man, what's going on? Like this guy right here, he's saying one thing, but then look what he's doing. Um, there was a lot of things that I didn't agree with that I saw when it came to like corporate sponsorship and things that just weren't fair, and I didn't agree with. And so that was one of the things that caused me to say, you know what, I'm going to leave DC. And people said I was crazy because Obama was running for president at the time. And they're like, stick around, man. You could get a job within the Obama administration doing, you know, there was a lot of opportunities. And, but it wasn't for me. Um, so then I left DC and I went out to San Jose, California. And this is where I really began to understand this definition of success. You see, because in DC, I was, you know, had the degree, I had the suits, but was still acting like a pendejo, man. Like we'd go to these, you know, what do they call them? Receptions. And man, everybody's just drinking. They're drinking, they're eating great food. Just nobody pays attention to the people speaking at the receptions. It was just one big like social social life, and it was all about who you know and your connections, and um, it just was, it was cool, at that time for me, because I had my viewpoint was really kind of narrow. But in my heart, I knew that it wasn't for me. I wanted to try something. I said, if I could make it in DC, I can come back later on in life. And I went out to California, San Jose, California, and that's what really I grew up. So I like to say, I spent most of my adult life out there, and that's where I really began to grow up. I knew I always liked working with youth. We'd volunteer all the time in college. And one of the things that they told me when I left, I made it from the high school, they said, don't forget to reach back and help someone else along the way. And so I was very inspired to do that, to try to help motivate other brown kids to believe in themselves and, go to college and do good things for their life. But there was one thing that was missing. And maybe this is what bothered me about the congressman that I saw, was that it kind of was a reflection of myself, kind of looking and, I'm talking one thing, but I'm not, my actions, they don't go together. And so it led me to San Jose, California, and I was looking for employment working with youth, and came across an agency called the Mexican American Community Service Agency, MAXA. And I remember going in thinking, man, I'm from DC. I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna school all these kids, and I'm gonna, it's gonna be easy to get a job. And again, this idea of success, it got rejected, because when I came in, I wanted to be a motivational speaker too at that time. And I came in dressed kind of nice, and this was a community agency, like straight in the hood. And I met with one of my best friends at the time. At the time, I just met her for the first time, Anadelia Soto. She's like this down-ass Chicana, like real cool. And she probably, she says it, she saw me, she's like, who is this fool trying to come in here wearing a suit and, trying to speak all fancy and, you know, um, but the thing is that she kind of introduced me to the director there, Mario Osuna Sanchez, and they had their thoughts about me, but they didn't rule me out. What they did was they invited me and said, well, if you're interested, come check this group that we do. Come out, just come check it out. And I think most people, they don't come back. But for me, I showed up, and I remember going to this young men's group, checking it out as a volunteer, quote unquote. And I remember arriving, and there was about a group of, I don't know, 8 kids, teenagers, boys. It was a young men's group. And I remember sitting there, and then Mario facilitating the conversation that evening. And he talked about palabra. That was the workshop, palabra, being a man of your word. What does that mean? What does palabra mean? And, it was deep. And I think more so for myself, because I was already, at that time I was like 23, and I was able to kind of like reflect and process a little bit more. But really what started to happen was this mirror was kind of placed in front of me, and I began to reflect internally. And it was a trip, because I went in thinking that I was going to really school these kids. And man, I came out with a notebook full of notes. And this agency was, everything was based on cultura, this idea that cultura cura. So, which is a trip, because I had never, in Nebraska, that we didn't have that. No one ever talked about these things. And so all of a sudden I started to meet the guys who worked there, and they're older men that were like 50, in their 40s and 50s. Man, they're talking about all these things that were just tripping me out. Like, being a man of your word, respecting women, having values, anti-violence, right? Like just, but like from a cultural perspective. And there's talking about like our cultura indígena, right? Like, using copal, using sage, and talking, stories and teachings. And it was just like, man, I just felt connected, right? All these times, all these years, there's always this desire to feel connected, accepted, loved, appreciated. From being a little kid to being a college student to being working in Washington, D.C. It was always that. Where do I fit in? Where do I fit? And this place helped me realize, I found what I was looking for. But it was going to be hard. It wasn't going to be easy, because these things are not easy. They're hard, because it's not about just talking one thing. And then on the weekends, right, I tell the kids, what good is it if I'm here telling you to respect women, be sober, don't do drugs because they hurt families, And then on Friday night, you see me in the cantina, I'm all pedo doing drugs and I'm slapping women around, calling them bitches and doing all that. You know what? What are you going to think about me? What's that going to say about me? And so that was hard, right? Because there was a lot of different transitions that I had to make if I wanted to walk down this path the correct way, right? Because there's a lot of people that help people and they drink and they do whatever they do. But from a cultural perspective of healing and working for families and community, you can't walk two separate paths. They don't go hand in hand. So I had to make a lot of different life choices, transitions. But it was life-changing, life-altering. And so my definition of success began to change. So no longer was this definition like what do they call that? Vertical, or going up and down a ladder, a never-ending ladder that never comes to be. But then my life perspective began to change into a circle, right? And understand that, like how we're connected. And these were teachings that I received as a young kid, right? Growing up from my father, from my mother, my grandparents. So I have these memories of my mama Porfiria, my dad's mom, and she was a small woman, but she was the heart of the family. And, sometimes she would take care of me. And I remember her, when I would go to her house, sometimes she would make me beans, like with chorizo. So she would, because I wanted that. I loved it as a little kid. And decían que me chequeaba, right? Because she would just make that just for me because I would want it. And but I remember that she would take her time and create these beans, and she would make pan tostado and then put butter and put a little bit of sugar, right? We didn't have like pan dulce or donuts or cake, whatever, but she would do that just for me. And I remember these things, like, right, like she would sit me down and read the Bible to me in Spanish, and pray for me. And that's what she was doing, right? Because she was praying. And when she would do these things, she wanted good things for me, right? I'm going to feed you because I want you to be healthy. I want you to have food because with food, you have life. I'm going to pray for you because I want good things to come to your life, right? So it was very deep, real deep things that she was doing. She would hug me, kiss me, like, and love me. And the thing was that my mom was like that too. But there was another thing is that I got to meet my great grandma, and her name was Severa. We used to call her Mamaita, and she lived in Mexico. And I remember her very well. She would tell my mom that she would want me to go to her house to eat. And I used to hate going over there to eat because she would make the beans kind of watery. And I like the refried beans with chorizo, but she would make them watery. And so I would go over because my mom would make me. And, as a little kid, she would call me mi chatito, mi chatito, and she would be happy. And she would wear a beanie always, like, because she was older, I guess, and was cold, and with the apron. And she would feed me the beans and the tortillas and the soda. And, I remember her praying too, and just always hugging and being loving and touching. And what I came to understand and realize it was that because they understood that in life there were going to be moments where we were going to feel disconnected, where we were going to feel hurt, and we were not going to feel handsome, we're going to feel bad, we're not going to be good. That society would send these messages that we were going to be pulled a certain way. And so they wanted us to feel connected, to feel loved, and to never forget that. And so they would do these things, and they never had any like one of our teachers always says, they didn't take any parenting classes or counseling, this and that. It was a natural part of our culture because that's what you do, right? And so this idea of success started to change, and it became to understand like a circular format that I'm successful when the people around me are safe. You mentioned the word safety, which is very key. So when people around me feel safe, when I'm living healthy and I'm living a good life, that's success. When my family is living a positive life, when they have their needs being met, then that is success. When my community is starting to feel, connected, and there's healthy families and people are happy, that's success, right? So then there's this idea of success that starts to, change, and it goes back to our cultural teachings. And so, that's kind of how I view success, and what's brought me to be who I am now. Success for me is when I'm able to live and walk my palabra, and I can. What brings me back to Nebraska, right? My family. I've been gone from my family. There's a pandemic happening, and so I can't be away. A pandemic, and then me being gone from mom, dad. Got to be here to support. My dad works in a meatpacking plant, very vulnerable. My mom has health concerns, very vulnerable. My sister just had a baby, first grandkid. So, there's responsibilities that come. And so success for me is being able to fulfill that, to be present. For young kids to look up to me and feel safe, to feel that I'm someone that's gonna help them, not hurt them. That abuelitas, know that I can help take care of them. That's success. So that women don't feel scared when I'm around. They don't fear that I'm going to womanize or that I'm going to disrespect them. That's success. You know what I mean? When the people around me are doing good, to me, that's success. So it's transition, but I had to be reminded and be surrounded by all these men. And so I was very fortunate, from my perspective, right? And this is, I kind of mentioned in the beginning, this is based on my life experiences and my perspectives and what I've seen. And some people may agree, some people may not, but that's kind of what I view and what I see and how I believe. So yeah, it's a long answer because it's not an easy answer. There's a lot of pieces that come into it. But yeah, so that's kind of my definition of success and how it's changed and how it's kind of come about.
I think, again, that's one of the things we really appreciate for having different brothers come on is just the thought that has been put into finding what success means to them, right? And it's not all just a pretty picture, and it's not something that they were just kind of they just knew all of a sudden, or always have known. It's just this constant kind of evolving thing that goes on in your life that, and through, like you said, your experiences and the different things that you have to go through in your life, it kind of shapes it. And, it almost like success for people is just more blurry for some than others. It almost seems like the people that we've talked to, that picture just gets a little more clear onto what they want, right? I think instead of necessarily finding a new way to define success, it's just like they're getting a more clear picture of what success is always meant to them deep down, but just as they've aged and as they've had different experiences, it kind of just helps clear up that vision for them.
Yeah. For sure.